on profession of faith. On profession of faith. It takes exactly 60 solemn seconds to recite the oath of office for a congressman. Just 60 solemn seconds appended at the end with the words, "So help me, God." And it takes only just a second of indiscretion to break that oath. John Donne reminded us that each time a clock tolls, we move closer to the eternal. While Frank Capra, in this season, in his work, It's a Wonderful Life, reminded us that every time a bell rings, an angel receives his wings. But one old Ranger Battalion commander, who eventually became a retired 3-star general and on the Ranger Hall of Fame, had said that every time we assemble solemnly on a parade field or in discreet, solemn places to publish the order, be they in recognition of award or promotion or other purposes in a rule of law, those are the moments when we define who we are. Those three hallowed words of duty, honor, and country that an Army general and American Caesar had said reverently dictate what we ought to be, what we can be, and what we will be. Our rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. And in a pandemic year where there was a lot of talk about a duty to vote, a duty to stay at home, a duty to engage in social distancing, and now a duty to vaccinate, there was also a lot of talk about faith regarding places of worship described by the Virginia governor as hotbeds of infection, where persons were not wearing masks, where persons of faith were told that a God eternal was everywhere and that there was no need to worship in a church as he spoke for God, and of which in those places of worship, some were in the stream of commerce that had been disrupted, and that by the end of the pandemic had their doors, the doors of the church, closed forever. But one elected official, approaching his retirement, decided to make a peculiar choice, particularly as a law enforcement officer moving against the safety guidelines, even promoted by the nation's only physician serving as a state governor, as he, on an alleged profession of faith, decided to find Jesus and join a church for Christian fellowship and devotion in his twilight years. But the great existential question remains before a court. Did he make his decision for Christ? Meet Sheriff Dana Lawhorn of the city of Alexandria. What makes a man join a church during the pandemic? People join churches for many different reasons. Sometimes because they just want to have a beautiful venue for their wedding, gay or not. Many have questioned the sincerely held faith beliefs of those who have decided to claim a religious exemption to the vaccine mandates. But this twilight year conversion is the topic of a matter going to trial before the courts of the Commonwealth regarding some decisions that the sheriff, Dana Lawhorn, had made before he found Jesus Christ of report. and perhaps raises a question for all who claim a sincerely held faith belief in a pandemic. Have you made your decision on Christ? Or in the alternative, if you were to reside in some totalitarian regime, perhaps in Eastern Europe, or in some other regime in the Middle East, and were accused of being a religious and devout Christian person, would there be sufficient evidence for a jury of your peers beyond a reasonable doubt to convict you of that crime? Or perhaps a more intriguing question, in testament of your faith, would you attempt to mount a robust defense to avoid conviction of that very crime of which you had been accused, presenting exculpatory evidence, including the testimony of corroborating witnesses to testify under penalty of perjury on your behalf to gain acquittal from the crime of being a Christian? Meet Commonwealth Attorney Brian Porter, the prosecutor for the city of Alexandria, who had run a race unopposed and had claimed the approval of 97% of the voters, prompting him to conclude after his re-election to serve a third term that he had to be doing something right in his assessment of himself. As he looked in the mirror, he believed that he had to be doing something right. And he needed no God to check his facts. To give him question, to give him reason for pause. Perhaps in Hebrews, he was that tragic hero, fallen by o'erweening pride, who lacked the ability to check himself, to protect himself, to use the vernacular. For on the day before Thanksgiving, a presiding judge at the Alexandria Circuit Court determined that there was credible evidence of material issues of fact to deny his motion to dismiss an action brought for malfeasance, dereliction of duty in performance of his duties, and contempt of court, even though the prosecutor, Brian Porter, had thought by being a Democrat he could walk into a Democrat court and have everything go right. He thought that he had to be doing something right, and so apparently did 97% of the voters with whom he elected to a right to remain silent during his campaign for re-election, while he thought he was doing something right. But was that right? A Democrat judge in a Democrat town didn't think so. And that says something for itself. On the day before Thanksgiving, a presiding judge at the Alexandria Circuit Court determined that there was credible evidence and material issues of fact to deny his motion to dismiss an action brought that had alleged conspiracy to evade a summons, a service of a summons that was supposed to have been served in an action against the state lockdown and delivered to the governor, Ralph Northam, and the Attorney General, Mark Herring, his fellow elected Democrat Party leaders, a felony crime in violation of federal criminal code and punishable by up to 20 years in federal prison. But the prosecutor, Brian Porter, thought all the while that he had been doing something right. And so apparently did 97% of the voters with whom he elected a right to remain silent during his campaign for re-election. all the while he thought that he was doing something right. But was that right? A Democrat judge in a Democrat town did not think that was sufficient to survive a motion, his motion, brought to dismiss those claims. On the day before Thanksgiving, a presiding judge at the Alexandria Circuit Court determined that there was credible evidence of material issues of fact to deny his motion to dismiss an action that had been alleged a pattern of events that corroborated a conspiracy to violate civil rights, a federal crime punishable by up to 10 years in federal prison. A matter apparently of no concern at all, even to the ACLU, Black Lives Matter, the NAACP, the Urban League, or the woke social justice clergy. After a year, during which they took to the streets in protest, tore down statues on a claim of demand for justice, accusing persons of racism during a raging pandemic, all the while pointing fingers at others in shame for doing the wrong thing, and all the while convinced that they were the group of people who were doing something right. But was that right? A Democratic judge in a Democratic town looked at these facts and didn't think so. And that situation speaks for itself. But the most concerning question in a very progressive town where the very first African American ever elected to the city council was the pastor of the Third Baptist Church. In the first election after the city of Alexandria had been readmitted to the Union, a historic black church that stands still today on Princess Street. The most concerning question in a very progressive town where the last and only Republican mayor had been elected in the second election after the city of Alexandria had been returned to a more perfect union after a bitter and brutal civil war is why the retiring sheriff, Dana Lawhorn, who had been mandated by the court to inform the Commonwealth attorney about these serious allegations, had made a decision before he found Christ to not disturb his fellow Democrat friend during his re-election campaign, or even the mayor, Justin Wilson, during his re-election campaign. Indeed, the most intriguing question in this very progressive town, where they even have rainbow flags bigger than the cross atop the church, is why the Commonwealth attorney, who had denied all of these allegations of wrongdoing to the court under oath, decided that he had sufficient motivation to tell his secretary that he refused to see a commercial process server who had come to serve him at his place of business with a summons from the court. And why, while running for re-election, had taken such determination to run away from a commercial process server trying to bring him into this action presently before the court, a matter in which a Democratic judge in a Democratic town looked at these facts and concluded there was sufficient reason for further inquiry. Sufficient reason for further inquiry to proceed to a trial on merits, a day in court for him now to exercise his rights. And you may have noticed that the press didn't get around to talking about that, but every day we'll tell you about critical race theory. We'll tell you about the militia and the insurrection and impeachments, and we'll tell you your duty to get vaccinated, and tell you, just as if they were a church, that is the right thing to do, even if that is not the right thing for the press to do in the First Amendment, for that is reserved to the province of the church. Can I get a witness in a case? Can I get an amen to testify? John Donne reminded us that each time a clock tolls, we move closer and closer to the eternal. While Frank Capra, in It's a Wonderful Life, reminded us that every time a bell rings, an angel receives his wings. But one old Ranger Battalion commander, who eventually became a retired 3-star general and on the Ranger Hall of Fame, had said that every time we assemble solemnly on a parade field or in discreet solemn places to publish the order, be they in recognition of award or promotion or other purposes. In a rule of law, those are the moments when we define who we are. Those 3 hallowed words of duty, honor, and country that an Army general had said reverently dictate what we ought to be, what we can be, and what we will be. Our rallying points to build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn. On profession of faith. On profession of faith. Like clicking that icon soldier on. Like walking into a church and clicking that icon praise on. It takes exactly 60 solemn seconds to recite the oath of office for a congressman. Just 60 solemn seconds appended with the words, "So help me God," at the end. And it takes only just a second indiscretion to break it.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
Thunk, I could have had a vaccine.